Son, her things are all out there. If he wants to come in, it's going to cost him $50,000 in back rent. Her new sister needs a trip to Europe. My own father said this while looking me straight in the eye, as if we were discussing the weather. I was still wearing my firefighter's uniform, stained with soot and sweat, after 24 hours of saving lives in 3 different fires. My name is Hudson, and at 29 years old, I just found out that my own father considers me nothing more than a source of income. I was standing on the porch of the house where I grew up, the same house where my mother taught me to tie my shoes, where she read me bedtime stories, where I cried when she died of cancer when I was 12. Beside me, 2 old suitcases and a few cardboard boxes contained my entire life. Dad, I just got off a full day's shift. I saved 3 people from a burning building today. I'm exhausted and just want to take a shower and get some sleep before my next shift. He crossed his arms, completely blocking the door. That's not my problem. You're an adult, you have a stable job. It's about time you started paying her share. Behind him, I could see Melissa, her new wife of 2 years, holding a glass of wine and smiling smugly. Her 22-year-old daughter Brittany was on the couch playing with her phone, probably posting something about how she was living her best life, while I was being kicked out of my own home. $50,000? I asked, trying to process the absurd amount. Retroactive. For the last 5 years you lived here for free, Melissa replied from across the room, her voice sweet as poison. Brittany calculated it all out. She's studying business, you know. Brittany didn't even look up from her phone. She was wearing an outfit that cost more than her monthly salary. The same little girl who had never worked a day in her life, who drove a car I helped pay for with my family contribution over the past few years. I looked at the boxes again. I recognized some of her childhood things mixed in with clean uniforms and personal equipment. They had searched her room meticulously. Dad, do you remember that I've been paying the electricity and water bills for this house for 3 years? That I buy the food in her refrigerator? That I renovated the upstairs bathroom with my own hands? He sighed as if I were a stubborn child. That was her contribution to the family. Now you have to pay for real if you want to stay here. I could feel the neighbors watching through their curtains. Mrs. Martinez, who my mother used to visit for coffee, was watering plants that clearly didn't need watering. Mr. Peterson stopped mowing the lawn and pretended to adjust something on the mower. I understand, I said, picking up one of the suitcases. Aren't you even going to try to negotiate? Melissa called from the living room, clearly disappointed. What a cold sun. I carried my things to the pickup truck parked on the street. Each step hurt, not only from physical exhaustion, but from something much deeper that was breaking inside my chest. When I was done, I went back to the porch. Dad, just one question. Did Mom know you would do this to me one day? For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. Your mother is no longer here, Hudson. I have a new family now. I need to take care of her. Of course you do. I got in the truck and drove to the barracks, where I knew I could sleep in the quarters for a few days. As I parked, I took out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer, the second to the property registry office. Because there was something my father and her new family didn't know. Something my mother had guaranteed in her will before she died. Something I had kept for 17 years, hoping I would never have to use. The next morning, while they were probably celebrating how they had gotten rid of the deadweight, I would be back. But not as the rejected son begging for a place to stay. If you've ever felt that the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you the most, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because the next day, my father would discover that kicking someone out of the house can have consequences he never imagined. At the barracks, as I tried to sleep in a bed that smelled of industrial detergent, my mind couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa's satisfied smile and my own father's icy indifference. Melissa had entered our lives as a helpful nurse at the hospital where my father worked as a radiology technician. 6 months after my mother's death, she showed up at our house with an apple pie and an excuse about checking to see how we were recovering. At 42, she was 15 years younger than my father, with bleached blonde hair and a way of speaking that alternated between overly sweet and overly sharp, depending on her audience. Brittany came along with the package. A spoiled teenager who made it clear from day one that I was an obstacle to the perfect life she planned to have. While I worked after school to help with the bills, she spent the next few years turning our living room into his personal influencer office, recording dance videos and posting photos in expensive clothes my father bought to help her express herself. The wedding took place 2 years later, in a small ceremony where I was treated more like an uncomfortable guest than the groom's son. Melissa wore his mother's wedding dress, which she found in the attic and had adjusted to make it more modern. When I protested, my father told me that Mom would have wanted the dress to be worn again, that it was a waste to leave it in storage. That night, I cried in the ballroom bathroom, not only because of the desecration of my mother's memory, but because I realized that my father had chosen his new happiness over preserving any trace of the old one. The transformation of the house was gradual but relentless. The plants that my mother cared for so lovingly died by accident. Her handwritten recipes disappeared during a spring cleaning. The armchair where she used to read was donated to charity because it took up too much space. Even the colors of the walls changed, from warm, welcoming tones to clinical whites that made the house look like a doctor's office. Melissa had a knack for making me feel uncomfortable without ever seeming openly hostile. Comments about how I left the bathroom after showering, about his weird way of chewing, about how my friends were too loud when they came to visit. Gradually, I stopped bringing people home. Gradually, I started spending more time away. When I graduated from high school and decided to become a firefighter instead of going to college right away, she made a point of commenting in front of the neighbors about how I didn't have academic ambition like Brittany. Brittany, who had changed college majors 3 times in 2 years and still hadn't graduated with anything, but who, according to Melissa, was exploring her passions. The worst part was the financial manipulation. When I started earning a decent salary as a firefighter, Melissa began casually mentioning how the bills were getting heavy, how it would be mature of me to contribute to the family expenses. I agreed, of course. After all, I lived there, used water, electricity, heating. But $50 a month turned into $100. $100 turned into $300. $300 became, "Can you pay the entire electric bill? Brittany needs a new laptop for school." Soon I was paying for practically all the household bills while Melissa spent his father's salary on clothes for her and Brittany, dinners out, and little weekend trips to de-stress. When I questioned the spending once, my father took me aside and said that Melissa was going through a difficult time adjusting to married life, and that I should be more understanding. That family was about mutual support. That his mother would want to see us all happy together. The irony is that my mother would never have allowed such a situation. She worked part-time as a secretary at an elementary school, but she managed every penny as if it were gold. She taught about home economics, about the difference between need and want, about how to build stability through discipline. Melissa saw his salary as an unlimited credit card attached to a son who wouldn't dare complain. And she was right. For years, I didn't complain. I worked double shifts, did overtime, took on every extra shift available. Not because I loved working myself to exhaustion, but because at home I felt like a stranger paying rent to visit a distorted version of my own childhood. 3 years ago, when I installed new central heating in the house, Melissa commented to her friends about how convenient it was to have a son who understood renovations, referring to his son. 6 months later, when I remodeled the master bathroom because the shower had been leaking for months, her photos were posted on Facebook crediting the amazing work of the professionals without mentioning me once. Last week I had overheard Brittany on the phone with a friend. "No, I won't be able to travel to Europe this summer unless Hudson pays. But he will pay. He always does." Mom knows exactly how to ask. Now, lying in the narrow bed in the barracks, I understood that today had not been about money. It had been about power. About showing that they controlled not only my comfort, but my basic sense of belonging. That I was tolerated, not loved. Accommodated, not welcomed. What they didn't know was that my mother had been smarter than any of us realized. And tomorrow, when I returned to that house, it wouldn't be as the rejected son begging for forgiveness. It would be as the rightful owner demanding explanations. Because 17 years ago, in the last days of her life, my mother had made a decision that would change everything. At 6 in the morning, I was awakened by the sound of my phone vibrating insistently on the nightstand in my lodgings. Text messages arrived one after another, all from the same number, Melissa. "Hudson, his father is very upset about her behavior yesterday. She needs to come back and apologize. Brittany is crying because of her. She is destroying our family. If he doesn't show up here by noon to resolve this properly, we'll have to take more serious measures." I ignored them all. He took a quick shower, put on his civilian uniform, and drove to the bakery where he used to meet Tommy Morrison, my former retired captain. Tommy had been my father's mentor when he worked part-time as an emergency medical technician before moving into hospital radiology. If anyone knew my family's full story, it was he. I found Tommy at his usual table in the corner of the bakery, reading the newspaper and drinking black coffee. At 68, he still had his military bearing and that piercing gaze that could read a situation in seconds. "Hudson," she said, looking up from the newspaper. "From the look on his face, I'm guessing he's not here just for breakfast." I sat down across from her and told her everything. Every detail of the eviction, every financial manipulation of the last few years, every little cruelty I had swallowed in silence. Tommy listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally with that somber expression I knew so well. "His father has always been weak for beautiful women," Tommy said finally. "Her mother, Catherine, was different. She had strength, character. This Melissa. I met her a few times at hospital events. I saw how she operated, always calculating, always measuring what she could gain from each conversation." He paused, stirring the sugar in his coffee with deliberate movements. "Catherine came to see me 2 weeks before she died, Hudson. She said she was worried about the future, that she knew your father better than he knew himself. She knew he would remarry quickly, that he would seek comfort wherever he could find it. And she was terrified that you would be vulnerable." My heart raced. What did she do? She asked him to witness some documents. She said it was an early gift for his 18th birthday, but that you should only know about it if you really needed to. Tommy took an old leather wallet out of his back pocket and pulled out a yellowed business card. "She left instructions for me to give you this if you ever came to me about family problems." The card had the name of a downtown law firm, Morrison & Associates Real Estate and Probate Law. "Morrison is my nephew," Tommy explained. "Catherine transferred ownership of the house to a trust in his name 2 months before she died. Your father signed the papers thinking it was just a formality to facilitate the future inheritance. Melissa never knew that the house technically belongs to you since you turned 21. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. She did that for me? Her mother was smarter than any of us realized. She said that if you ever needed the house for protection, you would have the legal means. But she also said she hoped you would never need to use it, that his father would be man enough to protect you both." At that moment, my phone rang. It was my father. "Hudson, where are you? Melissa says you've taken some important things from the house. You need to come back now so we can talk like men." "Dad, I didn't take anything that wasn't his." "Hudson, you're being childish. $50,000 isn't that much. You can pay in installments, make a payment plan. Melissa has already calculated everything." I looked at Tommy, who was watching my expression with growing attention. "Dad, can I ask you a question? Do you remember signing some papers for her before she died? Documents related to the house?" Silence on the other end of the line. A silence too long to be casual. "Why are you asking this, Hudson?" "Answer the question, Dad." They were just formalities. Security documents in case something happened to me too. Catherine was being cautious about inheritance issues. Tommy nodded gravely and gestured for me to continue. "And did you explain these documents to Melissa when you got married?" Another silence. Even longer. "Hudson, what are you getting at?" That's when I realized my father knew. Maybe not the specific legal details, but he knew there was something he hadn't told Melissa. Something that could completely change the power dynamics in the house. "I'll call you back, Dad." I hung up before he could respond. Tommy was smiling for the first time since I'd arrived. Catherine always said he was smarter than he let on. Just like her. "Tommy, if I go to that office and confirm that the house is legally his, that means he can. It means you can do whatever you want with her property, including deciding who can and can't live in it." He leaned forward. "But Hudson, that kind of power comes with responsibility. Catherine didn't do this for him to get revenge. She did it to protect him." I carefully put the card in my pocket. What if protection and revenge are the same thing? Tommy stood up, left money on the table for the coffee, and put his hand on my shoulder. "Then you'll find out what kind of man you really are." As I drove to the law office, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Melissa, Brittany, my dad, unknown numbers. I turned the phone off completely. In the parking garage of the downtown building, before getting out of the car, I allowed myself to feel for the first time in years something I had buried deep inside, the feeling of real power. Not the power to work longer hours to pay bigger bills. Not the power to keep the peace through silence and submission. The power to decide exactly how this story would end. Because my mother, even in her final days, had found a way to give me something that Melissa and Brittany could never take away, control of his own destiny. And when I returned to that house, it wouldn't be as the rejected son begging for reconciliation. It would be as the owner demanding explanations. At the Morrison & Associates office, I sat in a leather armchair that still smelled like new furniture. James Morrison Jr. was a younger version of Uncle Tommy, same military bearing, same direct way of speaking, but with the technical vocabulary of a Harvard graduate. His case is fascinating, Hudson, he said, leafing through a thick folder containing documents he had never seen before. Her mother was extraordinarily thorough. Not only did she transfer the property, but she created legal safeguards that prevent any future challenges. He turned the computer toward me, showing a screen full of scanned documents and official stamps. Catherine established an irrevocable trust 2 months before she passed away. Her father signed as the original co-owner, transferring 100% of the rights to you under a few specific conditions. You had to reach the age of 21, remain employed in a profession of public interest, and he paused, demonstrate a need for protection from destructive family influences. Those were her exact words. Destructive family influences, I repeated, feeling a twinge in my chest. She knew. Her mother was extremely intelligent. She included clauses covering specific scenarios: if his residents were evicted by non-owner members, if exorbitant fees were charged for residents on the property, or if there were attempts at financial manipulation through emotional blackmail. James opened another folder and took out photographs my mother had taken of the house, documenting every room, every improvement, even minor repairs she had done herself. Catherine documented everything. Every penny invested in the property, every renovation, every upgrade. According to these records, since her death, you have invested approximately $87,000 in home improvements and maintenance. That's not counting the monthly bills you've been paying. As he spoke, my phone vibrated constantly. Dozens of messages from Melissa, Brittany, and unknown numbers. Finally, I turned on the device and started reading. Hudson, his attitude is destroying this family. Brittany can't sleep thinking about how he abandoned us. Melissa. Man, his stepmom is saying he stole important things from the house. Is that true? Cousin Kevin, whom I hadn't seen in years. I know you're angry, but think about Brittany. She sees him as an older brother. My father. Hudson, I need to talk to you. It's about her old papers. Call me. My father, message sent 5 minutes ago. James watched my expression as I read. I guess they're turning up the pressure. My dad wants to talk about my mom's old papers. Interesting timing. Melissa probably started asking questions about legal issues with the house, and he remembered he signed documents he didn't read completely. James closed the folders and leaned forward. Hudson, I need to be clear about one thing. You have absolute legal rights to this property. You can evict them today if you want. But you need to decide how you want to proceed. Second option: possessory eviction proceedings. More aggressive, based on the fact that they changed the locks without the owner's permission and are charging rent illegally. 5 to 10 days to leave the property or face forced removal. Third. James smiled for the first time. Psychological strategy. We reveal her ownership gradually, allowing him to hang himself with attempts at legal legitimization. More time-consuming, but potentially more satisfying. I thought of Melissa's smug smile when she kicked me out. The way Brittany didn't even look up from her phone. The casual way my father blocked the door to her own home. I want the third option, but with a few modifications. Over the next 2 hours, we devised a meticulous strategy. James would prepare complete legal documentation, but reveal it in calculated stages. First, a seemingly routine subpoena requesting information on the legal basis for charging retroactive rent. Second, a formal request for access to the property for inspection of family records. Third, only if they resisted, full disclosure of the property with immediate eviction proceedings. This will give them an opportunity to back down gracefully, she explained, but it will also document every attempt they make to legitimize their illegal claim. As I drove back to headquarters, I stopped at a drive-thru for coffee and allowed myself, for the first time in years, to imagine what it would be like to live in that house without constant tension. Without unfairly distributed bills. Without Brittany's requests for money for emergencies. Without Melissa's passive-aggressive comments about his lack of family contribution. My phone rang. It was my dad. "Hudson, where are you? I need to see you. It's about things her mom left behind. Important documents." "Dad, I'm fine. I've found a place to stay." "That's not what this is about, son. It's about the house. Melissa is insisting that we get a lawyer about his reaction yesterday. But I remembered some things I signed when her mother was ill." "What kind of things?" "Hudson, come home. Let's resolve this as a family." "Home." I laughed without humor. "Dad, you changed the locks and charged me $50,000 to enter the house where I grew up. That's not my home anymore." "Hudson." "But don't worry. In a few days, you'll receive official correspondence about the status of the residence. Then we can talk properly." I hung up before he could respond. Back at headquarters, I found Tommy waiting in the lobby, holding a small cardboard box. "Your mother asked me to keep this too," he said, handing me the box. "She said that if you ever needed the house for protection, you would also need this." Inside the box, I found letters. Dozens of them, written by her during her last months, each addressed to him but never sent. The first was dated 6 months before her death. "My dear Hudson, if you are reading this, it means that my worst fears have come true. His father has found comfort in someone who does not understand the value of the family we have built. I don't blame him. Pain makes people make desperate decisions. But I can't let you pay the price for his choices." I stopped reading, put the letters away, and walked to the window of the lodge. I could see the entire city from there, including the neighborhood where I grew up. Somewhere in that direction, Melissa was probably calculating lawyers while Brittany posted about family drama. My father was rediscovering that there are consequences for abandoning children in favor of new families. If you've ever felt like you need to fight for rights your parents should have protected, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is far from over. The next morning, James would send the first official subpoena. 72 hours later, they would discover that the son he had cast out actually held absolute power over her lives. And then finally, they would learn that some bridges cannot be rebuilt after they have been burned. Because the sweetest revenge is not the one that destroys his enemies. It is the one that forces them to face exactly who they are when no one else is willing to tolerate them. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, James called with obvious satisfaction in his voice. "Hudson, the first subpoena has been delivered." His father signed for it personally. 15 minutes later, my office received 3 calls, from Melissa, and surprisingly, from a lawyer representing the Morrison family. "Have they already hired a lawyer?" They tried. But when I explained the nature of the subpoena to his colleague, he immediately canceled the representation. No competent lawyer will take on a case of retroactive rent collection against the legal owner of the property. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. 12 missed calls from his father, 6 from Melissa, desperate messages that evolved from confusion to panic in real time. "Hudson, I need to talk to you now. A paper arrived here about a legal challenge to rent collection. This is ridiculous." "Dad, 9:23 a.m. Hudson, what the hell have you done? Melissa is hysterical here." "Dad, 9:41. Son, for God's sake, answer the phone. I don't understand what's going on, but we can work this out." "Dad, 10:15. Hudson, if you don't call back in an hour, I'm going to the police station to report that you are threatening us legally for no reason." Melissa, 10:57 a.m. Finally, I returned my father's call. "Hudson, where have you been? A subpoena arrived here asking about the legal basis for retroactive rent collection. Melissa says you're suing us." "Dad, I'm not suing anyone. I'm just requesting legal documentation to justify the $50,000 you charged us." "Legal documentation? Hudson, this is our house. You don't need documentation." Interesting that you say "our," Dad. Because the subpoena also requests a copy of the property deed on which you based your right to change locks and charge rent. Absolute silence on the other end of the line. A silence so long that I thought the call had dropped. Dad. Hudson. Her voice was different, smaller, as if she had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Do you remember those papers your mother asked me to sign before she died? What kind of papers, Dad? Hudson, please come home. We need to talk in person. Home. I laughed without humor. Dad, you changed the locks and kicked him out. That's not his home anymore, remember? Son, stop it. You know it was just a misunderstanding. A $50,000 misunderstanding. I hung up and drove straight to the house. Not to beg for entry or negotiate reconciliation, but because it was time for the final showdown. When I parked on the street, I could see frantic movement through the windows. Melissa was pacing back and forth in the living room, gesturing wildly as she spoke on the phone. Brittany was sitting on the couch, for the first time without his cell phone in his hand, clearly realizing that something very serious was going on. I knocked on the door. My father opened it instantly, as if he had been waiting behind the door. His eyes were red and swollen. He had aged a decade since our last conversation. Hudson, come in. Please. I can't come in, Dad. You changed the locks, remember? I'm an intruder now. Stop that attitude. You know you can come in. Based on what? You've established that my entry costs $50,000. Did I bring the money? Melissa appeared behind him, her face contorted in an expression between anger and despair. Hudson, this summons is absurd. We're not anyone's landlords. This is the family home. Family? I looked directly at her. Melissa, you kicked him out yesterday. You said verbatim that this house belongs to you when my father isn't around. Now you want to know the legal basis for that statement. We don't want to know anything. We want you to stop this persecution. Persecution? I took out my cell phone and read aloud. $50,000 in retroactive rent charges. Unauthorized change of locks. Eviction of a long-time resident. Who's persecuting whom, Melissa? My father interrupted me. Hudson, about those papers his mother asked me to sign. What papers, Dad? They were documents about the house. About property. She said it was for protection, in case something happened to me too. Melissa turned to him with a look of fury. What papers? You never told me about any papers. I forgot. There were so many documents back then. Will, life insurance, bank account. I signed everything she asked her to. Brittany finally spoke, her voice small and frightened. Mom, what's going on? That's when I took the copy of the deed out of my pocket. What's happening, Brittany, is that you've discovered you can't kick someone out of their own home. The paper trembled in my father's hands as he read it. Melissa tried to snatch it from his hands, but he stopped her, his eyes scanning every line, every official stamp. This can't be right. Irrevocable trust established in the name of Hudson Morrison. Complete transfer of ownership effected 2 months prior to the death of Catherine Morrison, with full legal powers activated when the beneficiary reached the age of 21. Melissa snatched the paper from my father's hands and read it frantically. This is forgery. This is impossible. This house is his. Actually, Melissa, this house is his. It has been his for the last 8 years. You are his unauthorized tenants. The color drained completely from her face. Tenants? Tenants. Tenants who changed locks without the owner's permission, who charge other residents for access to the property, and who apparently believe they have eviction rights. My father sat heavily on the porch step, his head in his hands. Hudson, I didn't know. Your mother never fully explained what I was signing. She knew he would marry quickly, Dad. She knew his new family would view the house as joint property. So she made sure I had legal protection. Legal protection against what? Melissa shouted. I looked directly at her. Against this. Against financial blackmail. Against being evicted from the house I grew up in by people who moved here after my mother died. Brittany began to cry. Are you going to kick us out? Brittany, you kicked him out yesterday. I'm just documenting the legal consequences of that decision. Melissa was pale, but she tried one last attack. Even if this documentation is real, you've lived here for free for years. You owe thousands in rent. Interesting theory, Melissa. Except that homeowners don't pay rent to live in their own property. In fact, I took another document out of my pocket. According to my accounting, you owe me approximately $87,000 for renovations and maintenance I've done on my property. $87,000? Central heating, bathroom renovation, exterior painting, roof repair, replacement of appliances, all documented, with receipts and proof of payment. My father raised his head, finally understanding the magnitude of the situation. Hudson, what do you want, his? It was the question I had been waiting 17 years to hear. I want justice, Dad. And tomorrow, you'll find out exactly what that means. The next morning, at 8 o'clock sharp, James parked at the entrance to my old house, followed by a bailiff and 2 legal assistants. I accompanied them in my pickup truck, wearing my clean and ironed firefighter's uniform. If I was going to reclaim my property, I would do so with dignity. The whole neighborhood was watching. Curtains moved discreetly. People pretended to water gardens that didn't need watering. Mrs. Martinez, who had always liked my mother, waved subtly from her window. Melissa opened the door before we even knocked. His eyes were swollen red, as if he had spent the whole night crying or drinking. Possibly both. Hudson, please, we can work this out as a family. We don't need lawyers and officers. Family. I looked directly at her. Melissa, yesterday he charged me $50,000 to enter my mother's house. Now you want to work it out as a family. The bailiff stepped forward. Ma'am, I am Officer Rodriguez. I am here to formally notify you of a trespass lawsuit. You have 72 hours to voluntarily vacate the property or face forced removal. 72 hours? Brittany appeared behind her mother, still in her pajamas, with an expression of utter panic. Where are we going to go? We don't have money for a hotel. You should have thought about that before changing the locks on a house that isn't his. My father emerged from the living room, holding a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Hudson, I know you're hurt, but this is going too far. We're family. Dad, family doesn't kick family out. Family doesn't charge absurd retroactive rent. Family doesn't replace memories of a dead mother for the convenience of a stepmother. James stepped forward with a thick folder. Mr. Morrison, in addition to the eviction proceedings, my client is filing a claim for unauthorized renovations made to his own property. $87,342, duly documented. $87,000? Melissa practically shouted. Central heating, $16,000. Complete renovation of the master bathroom, $12,000. Exterior painting, $8,500. Roof repair, $15,000. James continued listing every renovation I had done in recent years. But he lived here. $87,000? Melissa practically shouted. Central heating, $16,000. Complete. It was his responsibility to maintain the house, Melissa protested. Actually, ma'am, landlords are not obligated to make improvements for the benefit of unauthorized tenants. Every penny invested can be charged as an improvement. My father sat down heavily on the living room sofa. Hudson, can his lawyer give us a moment in private? James looked at me. I nodded. 5 minutes. When we were alone, my father finally seemed to age all the years he had denied since my mother's death. Hudson, I messed up, didn't I? Dad, you chose a new family and decided I was expendable. You charged me money to move into the house where I was born. How do you think that made me feel? Melissa said you earned good money, that you could contribute more. She said it was fair. And you believed her instead of talking to me. He covered his face with his hands. Your mother warned me, Hudson. In her last days, she made me promise I would protect you from anything that might happen. She knew I was weak, that I would seek comfort in the wrong places. Brittany began to cry on the sofa. Hudson, I'm sorry. I didn't know Mom was making you pay so much. I thought you wanted to help. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Brittany wasn't malicious like Melissa. She was just spoiled, raised to expect others to solve his problems. Brittany, you're 22 years old. You've never worked a day in your life. Her mother taught you that my money was an unlimited family resource. Now you've discovered that resources have limits. Melissa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, still trying to maintain some dignity. Even if you're the legal owner, we contributed to this house. We took care of it for years. Melissa, you lived rent-free on his property while he paid all the bills and even made renovations. Your only contribution was to make his life unbearable. James returned. Mr. Morrison, I must inform you that, in addition to the civil lawsuit, the Internal Revenue Service has been notified of undeclared income. What undeclared income? Melissa asked, alarmed. The rent you charged yesterday. $50,000 constitutes taxable income that must be declared. Unless he admits it was extortion, in which case it would be a criminal matter. Melissa's face drained of color. We didn't charge rent. It was just a misunderstanding. Interesting, James consulted his notes. Because we have a recording of the conversation where you specify the exact amount and purpose of the funds, your daughter's vacation to Europe. That's when Brittany finally understood the magnitude of the situation. Mom, you recorded that? Hudson has the recording, not her, my father muttered, finally recognizing the extent of the planning. I took out my phone and showed them the recording app. Melissa, he's a firefighter. Documenting emergency situations is part of his training. Yesterday was definitely an emergency. For the next 72 hours, I watched from a distance as they organized the move. Tommy offered me the apartment above the bakery temporarily, but I preferred to stay at the station until the house was completely empty. On the second day, Mrs. Martinez came to see me at the fire station. Hudson, dear, the whole neighborhood is talking. We always suspected that Melissa was no good, but we never imagined it would come to this. As her mother used to say, Mrs. Martinez, people show who they really are when they think no one is watching. Her mother was a wise woman. She knew you would need protection. On the third day, Melissa tried one last gambit. She called crying, saying that Brittany was having panic attacks, that they had nowhere to go, that I was destroying a family. Melissa, families don't charge $50,000 in back rent to the son who pays all the bills. You destroyed the family, not me. Hudson, please. Melissa, you have until 6 o'clock this afternoon. After that, any property left on the premises will be considered abandoned. At 5:57 p.m., the moving truck left with his last belongings. At 6:01 p.m., I entered my house with the new key James had provided. Silence was the first thing I noticed. There was no tension in the walls. There was no expectation of confrontation floating in the air. Just stillness. I walked from room to room. They had taken everything they could, including some appliances that he had bought himself. I didn't care. Things can be replaced. Peace is priceless. In the bedroom that was my mother's, I found something that he had left behind, an old photograph of her in the garden, watering the plants that Melissa had let die years ago. I held the photo and for the first time since her death, I cried without anger, just with longing. I did it, Mom. The house is safe. 3 months later, the house was completely renovated. Not just necessary repairs, but improvements I had always wanted to make. A garden just like the one my mother used to tend. Warm colors on the walls. Comfortable furniture instead of pretentious decor. Tommy visited me one Saturday afternoon, bringing coffee and cookies from the bakery. How are you feeling, young man? Different. Free. For the first time in years, I wake up without fear of confrontation. Without guilt for existing. And his father? He calls me every week. He's living in a small apartment, worked some extra shifts to pay for a lawyer. Melissa and Brittany went back to her family in another state. It seems no one else was willing to support them. Are you going to reconcile, Tommy? I thought about the question for a long moment. Tommy, my father made choices. He chose to ignore pleas for help. He chose to believe accusations without checking. He chose the comfort of a new family over the well-being of his own son. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means recognizing that some bridges were burned by conscious decisions. But you're not closing the door completely? I'm not. But I'm not waiting for him to walk through it either. If one day he truly understands what he did and wants to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect, we'll talk. Until then, I have a life to live. 6 months later, I received a letter from Brittany. She had gotten a full-time job at a store and was taking night classes in accounting. She admitted that she had never understood the value of work until she was forced to support herself. She apologized for her past behavior and for her complicity in financial exploitation. I replied wishing her success in her new journey. I didn't offer reconciliation, but I didn't hold a grudge either. Sometimes, being kicked out of your comfort zone is exactly what someone needs to grow. As for Melissa, I never heard from her directly again. But through my network of former neighbors, I learned that she tried the same scheme with relatives in another state. It didn't work. Apparently, a person can only play the victim as long as people don't communicate with each other. On the first anniversary of the expulsion, I organized a barbecue in the backyard. I invited colleagues from the barracks, neighbors who had been kind to my family over the years, Tommy and his family. Mrs. Martinez brought an apple pie using the recipe my mother had taught her years ago. As I watched everyone talking and laughing in the garden my mother had cultivated, I realized something fundamental. Family is not defined by DNA or last names. Family is defined by consistent choices of loyalty, support, and unconditional love. My father chose Melissa over his son. Melissa chose greed over gratitude. Brittany learned that some lessons only come through consequences. And his son? He chose his own peace over trying to please people who saw his kindness as weakness. If his friend has faced betrayal from those who should protect him, if he has been exploited for her kindness or cast out by people who benefited from her generosity, subscribe to this channel. Stories like this prove that justice may be slow, but it always comes to those who have the patience and wisdom not to give up. Today, I wake up every morning in a house that is mine by right and by merit. I work saving lives because I choose to, not because I need to run away from home. And when I come back from my shifts, the key always works, because I finally learned that the safest place in the world is the one he builds with his own hands, protects with his own resources, and inhabits with her own dignity. The sweetest revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to build a life so full that his absence becomes irrelevant.